Today I'm going to go through the topic of meat. This quite naturally links with protein, so definitely there will be some references to your protein notes, so I would have them near you just in case you have any questions. The first thing we need to do is classify meat, which means put it into groups. The first group is carcass. Examples of carcass meat include beef, veal, which is calf, mutton, which is an older sheep, lamb, which is a sheep that is under a year old, pork, ham, and bacon. The next group is poultry. Poultry is what I describe as anything that has wings. So turkey, duck, goose would be some of the main examples of ones that we would eat. Game then is any meat that is usually hunted for or is wild. So deer is sometimes also known though as venison, rabbit, grouse, or pheasant. The last thing we need to look at then is offal. This is the edible organs of meat. So liver, kidney, heart, tongue, tripe, sweetbread, which is the pancreas, and brain. Although not commonly eaten by most people, they are a nutritional source all the same. One of the most commonly asked questions, if meat does come up in the Leaving Cert, is to talk about the nutritional composition. And what this always means, whether it's meat or any other food, is what nutrients make up that food, and in what varieties. The first one we need to look at is protein. Meat always contains high biological value protein, meaning that it has all the essential amino acids. The meat fibers themselves are made up of the proteins myosin, actin, and globulin. And the connective tissue then that joins all the meat fibers together is usually collagen or elastin. Meat has no carbohydrates, except for in the liver. So unless you eat liver, you need to serve your meat with a carbohydrate food, such as bread, potatoes, rice, or pasta. Meat tends to mostly as well be saturated fat. This is the hard fat that is not good for our heart. The amount depends on type, red meat tending to be the highest, and white meat such as poultry or chicken, turkey, etc. tends to be a lot lower. Fat can also be visible or invisible, which we'll look at in the next slide. The vitamins would be mostly the B group vitamin, which is water soluble, and then A and D are also found in offal. Meat tends to be a good source of iron, and in particular heme iron, and there is also small amounts of potassium, sulfur, and phosphorus. Water content varies greatly depending on the type. Some meats have a lower water content, and usually those are lower fat content, which are usually those that have a high fat content. The structure of meat is something that's usually asked as a short question, and there's a diagram here on the slide which you would need to be able to label but not draw. The main one you need to be able to label is the one on the top. Meat fibers then are made up of actin, myosin, and globulin, and they also have some minerals and vitamins in them as well. They are then all held together by connective tissue. Connective tissue is basically the glue that sticks the meat fibers together. During the cooking process, this connective tissue can break down, which leaves a lot of meat stringy or just in its fiber form. Fat then can be visible under the skin or can be marbled, which is like when it's kind of dispersed between the meat fibers, which I'll show you on the next slide. Here we can see the different types of marbling you get on meat. On the left-hand side, you can see the meat is marbled with fat, which means it's dispersed between the meat fibers. Whereas on the left-hand side, you can see the meat itself is relatively low in fat, whereas the rind there, or the fat, is on the outside of the meat. The one on the right-hand side is better because you can cut off the fat, but the one on the left-hand side is also good because you get the flavour of fat throughout the whole meat. Next, we need to look at the dietetic value of meat. This means, why do we have meat in the diet? A typical question that's come up in the past is talk about the nutritive, which we did previously, and the dietetic value of meat. I'd recommend you know 3 of these dietetic values to be able to answer the question fully. Whatever ones you pick are completely up to yourself, and some of them are quite similar to the nutritional value, so just be careful of that. The ones that I would recommend are the ones that say meat is a good source of heme iron. It's available in a variety of forms, such as fresh and processed, and it's a versatile food suited to many different cooking methods. Pick whatever ones you like. Another popular question when it comes to meat is what makes meat tough? The 3 main things that make meat tough are age, activity level, and treatment before or after slaughter, and also the method of cooking. Age basically means the older the animal, the tougher the meat, and this links well with activity. If an animal is older, it's probably moved around a lot more, which makes the meat tougher in the end. Activity level then can vary depending on whether the animal is very active, but also on the part of the animal. Things like the cheek, where the animal would chew its food, tend to be a lot tougher than the rump or the backside of the animal that doesn't tend to move a lot. Treatment and before and after slaughter is also very important. Animals need to be relaxed, which means the lactic acid is in their muscles, which will tenderize the meat during its resting period for about 28 days. Incorrect method of cooking also can have an impact. If a meat is already tough, it's important you cook it low and slow, such as stewing or slow cooking, not a quick method like grilling or frying. Now we need to look at how can you make meat more tender. The first way to make meat more tender is hanging. As you can see in the image, whole animal carcasses are hung inside butchers or abattoirs for usually about 28 days. The longer the meat is held in this state, the more tender and tasty it will be when you come to eat it. The reason why this method is so effective is because the lactic acid that was in the meat before the animal was killed works its way through the muscles and tenderizes it. It also also gives an additional shelf life because the acid kills any bacteria in the flesh of the meat. The next method of tenderizing is mincing. This is basically chopping the meat up into small, tiny little pieces, which not only chops the meat, but chops up the long, tough meat fibers. The smaller the meat fibers, the more tender they will taste. And it also makes the meat more digestible for those who are trying to eat it. The simple action of hitting the meat with a hammer can result in making the long meat fibers into shorter ones. This is an easy method to do at home. Marinating is another simple method that can be done at home. It's important your marinade contains some form of an acid. This acid, whether it's lemon juice or vinegar or something else, will again tenderize and break up those long meat fibers. Not only does the tenderizing make the meat have a nicer texture, but the acid allows flavors to get deeper into the fibers of the meat and gives the meat an overall better flavor when cooked. Slow cooking is another method that's become popular in the past few years, with a lot of people going out to purchase slow cookers. This allows the meat to be cooked on a very low temperature for a very long time, usually 6 to even 12 hours. This allows the collagen in the meat to be broken down into gelatin, which is something you may have used to set cheesecakes or something that's found in jellies. This gives the meat a much softer, tenderer texture. Meat tenderizers are something that are not typically used by a lot of people at home, but they are available to buy. They contain what's called prolytic enzymes. One of the most common ones is found in papayas, the fruit, and it's called papain. This breaks down the meat fibers and makes them more tender and softer when eating. When looking at the guidelines for buying meat, it's the same as any other food that needs to be kept in the fridge. So a lot of these ones you may have talked about for milk and cheese and other perishable foods will apply to meat as well. I would recommend you know 3 of these. Whatever ones you think you will know best, and remember the easiest yourself. There are many guidelines that should be followed when storing meat. Similar to any perishable food, it should be kept in the fridge. You've all probably stored meat in the fridge or freezer at some stage, so just use your own common sense here. Please know 3 of these. There are many effects of cooking on meat. I've included some on this slide and on the next slide. I would know 3 overall and pick whatever ones you think are easiest to remember. In the next few slides, I'm going to go through the processing of meat. It's important of all the processes I go through that you know 2. Here is the first processing of meat, freezing. Have a look through and know a few sentences on the process, know 2 effects and 2 examples. On this slide, I've included some information on freezer burn. Freezer burn happens when meat, or any other food product, is exposed to oxygen during the freezing process. This results in a tough, firm texture that, although is not unsafe to eat, is definitely not pleasant. Vacuum packing is another process that can be used on meat. Again, know the process, 2 effects and 2 examples. The next process meat can undergo is curing. It's important to know a little about the process, 2 effects and 2 examples here. The last process that can be applied to meat is drying. Know the process, 2 effects and 2 examples. The following 3 slides go through some examples of meat products. It would be important to know 3 of these to be possibly asked as a short question. Here on this last slide, I've given you some information on offal, along with some images of what each type of offal looks like. I've also given you the main nutrients found in each piece of offal. This would possibly be asked as a short question.